All right, let's get right into it. When we talk about war, what usually comes to mind? Politics, right? Or maybe borders, clashing beliefs. But what if I told you there's something else? A powerful financial engine humming just beneath it all.
So is war really just about ideology? Or is there this hidden financial machine at work? In this explainer, we're going to unpack that surprising and really powerful relationship between money, banking, and conflict. And we'll be pulling from some fascinating economic research and historical analysis to do it.
Okay, so war, politics, or profit. To even begin to understand this engine, we've got to start with a really basic question. How on earth does a country pay for a war? Because let's be real, it's an incredibly expensive undertaking.
You know, we're all used to the idea of taxes paying for government stuff. But wars? Wars are on a whole different level of expensive. They often cost way more than a government can just pull in through taxes alone. So, when that happens, they have to turn to a much more direct and, frankly, more powerful source of cash.
And that brings us right here, creating money for conflict. This is really the first major gear in that hidden engine we're talking about, the pretty wild ability of a government to just create its own money out of thin air.
Yeah, there's a fancy word for it, seigniorage. All it really means is the profit a government makes just by issuing currency. Think about it, it's the difference between what a coin or a bill costs to make and what it's actually worth. It is a remarkably cheap way to raise a lot of money fast.
And check this out. This quote from economist Joseph Haslag at the Fed really hits the nail on the head. He basically says, look, it costs the U.S. Treasury next to nothing to print a $100 bill. But that piece of paper, it can buy you $100 worth of real stuff. Stuff like missiles or paying soldiers' salaries.
But here's where it gets really interesting. That simple act of printing money, it gets amplified like crazy, just exponentially, by our modern banking system. So how does that even happen?
Well, it's all about something called fractional reserve banking. And what research papers like The Economics of War point out is that banks don't just sit on a pile of money and lend that out. Nope. In our system, they only have to keep a fraction of their deposits as reserves. The rest, they lend it out. And here's the kicker. The very act of lending creates brand new money in the economy.
So during a war, you get this incredibly powerful cycle going. Step 1, the government needs cash for military costs, so it issues war bonds. Step 2, the central bank often steps in and buys those bonds, which injects all this new money into the system. Step 3, that means commercial banks suddenly have bigger reserves, which leads to Step 4. Now the banks can create even more new money by giving out loans to, say, defense contractors and all the other businesses that pop up during a war.
And you can see here, this research really lays out how that cycle just fuels the whole wartime economy. It becomes this massive feedback loop of money creation. But, as you can probably guess, running this engine full blast, well, it has some pretty serious consequences.
So, let's talk about the hidden costs of war. Because this massive, and I mean massive, expansion of the money supply isn't some free lunch. It comes with these hidden costs that, one way or another, affect absolutely everyone.
The first big one is something economists call the inflation tax. And it's not a tax you see on your pay stub. It's the slow erosion of your money's buying power. The more money that gets pumped into the economy, the less each dollar is actually worth. Your savings just buy less.
And just how extreme can this get? Well, take a look at this number. 67%. That's huge. Research from the period right after World War I shows that back in 1919, Austria was raising about 67% of all its government spending just by creating money. And the result? You guessed it, catastrophic hyperinflation.
But it's not just inflation. The second major consequence is a massive, and I mean a mountain, of public debt. This whole process leaves behind a debt that doesn't just go away when the war ends. It has to be managed, paid off, and dealt with for decades to come.
So who actually profits here? Well, this is the crucial point. That mountain of government debt, it becomes a long-term interest-bearing asset for the banks and financial institutions that hold it. Plus, they can make huge profits from loans to the booming defense industry, or by speculating on all the market chaos war creates in things like oil prices, or even by hedging currencies as their values swing wildly.
Okay, so all of this naturally leads us to a really fundamental question, right? A system of conflict? If there is just so much money to be made from all this, is profit the real reason we go to war?
Now, there are common theories out there, especially from a Marxist perspective, that point the finger directly at profit-seeking capitalists and financial interests.
But back in 1939, an economist named Lionel Robbins offered a really different take. He argued the root cause of modern war isn't actually about capitalists, but about the existence of independent sovereign states all competing for power and resources.
For Robbins, the economic factors we've been talking about aren't the ultimate cause. They're more like the fuel for a fire whose real source is political, this international system we have of competing nation-states.
And this quote from him really sums it up. He's saying that the power of these independent states to mess with each other's economies is a huge source of disunity. So in his view, the financial machine we've been exploring doesn't create the conflict, but it absolutely makes it possible. And it for sure creates some pretty powerful incentives to keep it going within that political framework.
So here's the big takeaway, the framework to think about this with. The economic engine of war is incredibly powerful, no doubt about it. But it runs on tracks, and those tracks are laid by political division. The financial system is the engine, sure, but it's built on a foundation of political conflict between nations.
And that leaves us with a final and pretty challenging thought. If money creation is the fuel, is the real problem the system of independent nation-states itself, the true engine of modern conflict? It kind of makes you wonder, if we ever hope to turn off this engine of war for good, maybe we need to focus less on the fuel and a lot more on the design of the machine itself.